In this video, I'm going to be showing how to braid an 8-strand round plait around a core. This brown one I have as kind of an example of one I've already done. It's a pretty simple pattern. You can see the materials that I'm going to be using today. An Olfa knife, scissors, super glue, Sharpie, tape measure, and my core. So what I'm showing you is the diamond weave pattern that it creates. This type of braiding could be done around a handle for many things. Whips are what I normally use it for, but it can be used for many different things. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is measuring. I need to make sure that I cut the right width strips for braiding. So my dowel is approximately an inch across in diameter, which means I have to multiply that by pi to get the circumference. So it's 3.14 inches. I'm going to divide the circumference by 8 strands, which is how many strands I'll be using. The math on that's not very neat, but it comes out to be roughly 1 centimeter. So I know that each one of my 8 strands is going to be 1 centimeter wide. The other thing I have to measure is how long my strands are going to be. I need to cut them about twice as long as my dowel. My dowel is 7 inches long, approximately, which means I'm going to be cutting my strands to be about 14 inches long to give myself enough room on either side. So I'm just going to draw a quick cut sheet for myself so I know what I'm doing. I'm going to illustrate that there's 8 different strands of the same, they're all the same dimensions. Illustrations like these can help you make sure that you've got all the pieces you need before you start assembling something, that you've cut everything you need ahead of time. 8 strands, each 1 centimeter wide and 14 inches long. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is cut my strips. I'll be using a straight edge, just make sure I get a nice neat edge. I'm also using a cutting mat so that I don't cut my board up. Now I'm using an Olfa blade, which is just a straight razor blade. Unfortunately, I don't have any curved blades, but if I did have a curved X-Acto blade, that's what I'd be using, because a curved blade keeps the leather from buckling. As you're pulling it across, you can see that my straight edge knife is drawing it into buckles, and it makes the cut less clean. If I had a curved knife, that would be better for getting a cleaner cut. You can see it's buckling right there. I'm having to put my finger down to hold it in place. And I'm eyeballing them at a centimeter because I know exactly what a centimeter looks like at this point. But you could also use another ruler at the top to make sure that your lines are square and that you're cutting exactly the right width. Often I use 2 rulers. At this point, I'm eyeballing. I'm going to use scissors just to cut them apart at the ends, because I'm going to be cutting the ends off anyway. The ends of my strips don't need to look clean. If I were incorporating them into the final design of whatever I was making, I would want to make sure that I was aware of that now so that I could save the ends or cut them nicely to match the rest of the cuts. But as it is, I'm just cutting them off, so it won't really matter to me. Now, because I had to use a straight razor blade, my cutting job was not very good. I'm going to have to go back and trim all these pieces just to get the jagged edges off. So that's what I'm speeding through here now, is cutting them apart when I didn't cut them through all the way. And I've forgotten one, having to cut one more. I need 8 total. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes here. I've sped through it, but I'm going to spend a few minutes just trimming up the pieces, because you will see the edges as you braid the piece, so they should be relatively clean. So the reason that I have the tape is because the tape is how I align the strips before I even get to braiding them. They're how I position them so that when it does come time to wrap them around the core and braid them, they're already in a good position. I use electrical tape because it peels off the most easily off of most leather. You could use any tape, but be careful because some tape is too sticky to the leather, like masking tape, and will mar the surface. I use electrical tape because it's convenient and it peels off nicely. So depending on the design you want to do, if you're using alternating colors, this would be a time to set your colors up correctly. Since I'm only using one color, I won't be able to show you that in this video. Here I'm going to align half of my strips diagonally facing one direction, and you'll see I do the other half of the strips facing the other direction. So for my 8-strand round plate, this is going to be 4 on either side, crossing each other. Now I leave a couple inches hanging off the top of the tape because that tape line is actually where you wrap it around the top edge of your core. So it's helpful to leave some room at the end so that when you're back braiding to get the braids near the top tight, you have more play to work with. So here you can see that I'm aligning the opposite diagonal. Now this comes just with practice and doing this several times for yourself. Many people say not to do it at exactly a 90-degree angle. I've found that the angle that I initially start out with here on the tape really doesn't matter that much. As I'm pulling and wrapping the leather around the core, it stretches a little bit, and I can make it into whatever angle I need it to be in when it's already around the core. So I don't get too particular about what angle they are on the tape. Now, one of my tips is that I do one section of braiding before I even put the strips around the core. So right here you can see me alternating every other. This is just a typical braiding or weaving pattern, alternating every other strip up and down, over and under, in order to create that weave. And I just go through all 4 strips on either side here before I even wrap it around the dowel. This gives you a good starting point, so then when you get to the dowel, you've already got a small section of braiding already done, and you can see what the general design is going to look like, and you can go from there. It's a little bit easier than just starting from scratch at the top of the dowel. So here I am. When I flip these down, you'll see the pattern it creates underneath. This is actually the back side of the leather. You'll see as I wrapping around the core that the side that is facing up right now is actually facing inside on the dowel. You'll need to make sure that you put all the leather strips down, face down onto the tape. That way when you wrap it around the core, they're face out, like you can see them around the core now. That shiny part is the face outside, and the matte part is the skin on side. So now that I've used that tape to kind of hold it against the core, you can see I've already got some section of this braiding done. Now what I'm going to do now is tighten up the work that I've already done and give myself a good starting point for continuing the braid. You can see from this point, you can kind of get an idea of what the pattern is going to look like, and you can follow along from here which strips go over which, when they go under the other ones. So all I'm doing right now is tightening up the work I've already done. You can already see that diamond pattern coming out. Once I get the part that I've already done pretty tightly wrapped around the core, corrected, Then I start doing more of the strips. You can see that I generally hold the crossing leather with my left hand while I work it on the right hand side with the strips that are coming from the back on the right hand side to the front towards the left hand side. This is easier because I'm right handed. You could do it any other way. After a little while, you'll feel your hands get really uncomfortable. I can only do a couple minutes of this at a time. But generally, with my left hand, I'm just holding the last strip that I did down to keep that all tight. And in my right hand, I'm flipping the strips that it goes under back so that they're exposed, and then I flip them back down, and now they're over. And the opposite ones, the ones that I've left underneath in the previous strip, will now be the ones that I flip up over the core as I work with it. So the ones that are currently underneath the previous strip are the ones that now I'm flipping it up, and then I'll slip the other one underneath it. And this way, you can actually go all the way down. You don't ever have to switch directions. You can work only from the right to the left-hand side, using each strip as it comes around the back of the core, and you'll find that doing it this way will just carry you around the core, and you won't even have to think about moving backwards or in the other direction, because as you're rotating it to get to the next strip, you are moving down the core naturally. So you can see I've already made progress, and I'm nearing the end of the core. You need to make sure that you pull these tight as you go along. You don't really want to see gaps in the core. The other trick is that if you're using a type of leather, a color of leather that you can easily paint the core, I've also done that. If I'm using black leather, I'll paint the core black. That way, even if there are gaps, you don't see them as easily. Near the bottom, which is where I am here, it gets pretty tricky because it's a little bit hard to hold the core and the strips at the same time. But you need to just finish off the bottom and tape it temporarily. We'll come back and fix the ends in place, but for now I've just taped it. You can see that I've left the top as it was, and now it needs some work. You can see the braiding pattern hasn't been finished all the way, so I'm going to peel the tape off the top while I hold the leather in place so it doesn't slip off. And now is when I get to back braid. Back braiding is where you work from what you've already done back to the top to cover up what you started at. So now I'm working on the top of the dowel, and I'm going to recreate that pattern moving from where I first started back to the top. At this point, the pattern should be pretty clear to you. It should be making sense. This takes a little bit more fine motor skills, as you have to hold the strips down as you go along, but with practice, this is an easily accomplished task. So I'm just completing the pattern. I will put the tape back around this when I get it near the top, because the way that I'm going to choose to fix the ends in place is glue and finishing nails, because I won't be seeing the ends of my braiding in the final piece, since it's going to be a flogger and I'm going to attach falls and I'm going to attach bulbs to the handle on either end. You won't see the ends when I do it, so I'm simply going to use super glue and finishing nails. But before I get that ready, I'm just going to tape this back in place, now completely braided from the top to the bottom, and tape on both ends, holding the loose ends in place while I prepare my super glue and my nails. If you're working with super glue, it's pretty important to wear gloves, even if super glue weren't toxic, which it is. It's quite unfortunate when you super glue yourself to any of your tools or to the leather or your clothes. I always wear gloves. That way I don't even have to worry about it. So I'm just going to peel some of these back while I apply the super glue. I'll replace them against the glue and hold it in place for a few seconds while the glue sets. And I'll just work my way around the top like this, gluing every piece down to the wood or in the second layer to the piece below it. Meanwhile, I've kept the tape on. If I had taken the tape off previously, I would have lost some of this work that I've done braiding because the braids come undone so easily. If you even leave these for a second, you'll find that the braids come undone, partly because you have to do them pretty tightly, so there's already a bit of pressure there building up, and because there's nothing holding them in place. So now I'm working on the second layer. Once I get these all glued down to each other, I will nail in some finishing nails just to keep them in place. These finishing nails are pretty tiny, and I use them for a lot actually, because they can go pretty unnoticed, and you can put them below other things layer-wise. They're not too obtrusive that you can't work over them. So here I am. I'm actually going to nail each one of these pieces in. You're not going to see this in my final product, the very ends of the dowel, so it doesn't really matter how they look. I just need them to stay in place. So I'm just going to go around nailing each one in place. And time to do the bottom. Same procedure here. I'm going to glue all of the individual strips in place before I go around nailing them. For the bottom, I've actually decided to alternate gluing and nailing. I've also, at this point, I'm having to remove the tape because I taped it a little bit too close, but it's not a big deal. I'll only untape as far as I need to before I put the next nail in and untape the next part to try and keep the braiding in place while I fix the ends. So I'm peeling tape off the bottom. Now I've got both ends are fully glued and nailed in place. Like I said, you won't be seeing the ends in my finished piece, so for my purposes, I'm simply going to trim the excess off. If you were incorporating these into your design, whatever it is, you would need to make sure you knew that before you started so that you know exactly what to make them look like, how to attach them. If you need a different kind of method for attaching them, you won't see the nails that I've used in my piece, so it doesn't really matter. But if you are going to see them, pick a different method. Or if you like that method, that's fine. I'm going to finish trimming them. And there it is. There's plenty of different designs you can do with alternating colors, and those can be found online for a simple Google search, or you can just play around with it. But I've just done a solid gray one here. There's a couple of holes in the weave, but it's not too big a deal, not too big an eyesore. Diamonds are pretty even, pretty in line. Looks pretty good. Be ready to finish it off pretty soon.